What gave you the strength to fight like that? The woman across the table, a producer with sharp eyes and an even sharper pantsuit, leaned forward. Her name was Cynthia, and she held a pen poised over a notepad, as if my answer was the final missing piece to a grand puzzle. We were in a sterile meeting room downtown, the kind with glass walls and a view of the Chicago skyline. That was meant to make you feel important. A year ago, a room like this would have intimidated me. Now, it just felt like another Tuesday. I offered her a small, measured smile, the kind of smile I'd perfected over the last 12 months. It wasn't warm. Not exactly. But it wasn't cold either. It was the smile of a survivor. Strength isn't something you find. Cynthia, I said, my voice steady, the words flowing easily. It's what's left when everything else has been stripped away. It all started on a crisp, perfect October afternoon in Chicago. The kind of day that makes you forget winter is just around the corner. The mahogany door was slightly ajar, just 3 inches of space between my world before and my world after. Through that gap, I could see the afternoon sunlight streaming across Oliver's pristine office on the 45th floor. It illuminated the prestigious law firm's logo, Sterling and Finch, etched into the glass partition that separated his space from the bustling world of junior associates. I could hear the soft murmur of voices. His voice, warm and intimate in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in months. I was holding a small, insulated lunch bag. Inside was his favorite, a roast beef sandwich on rye, cut precisely in half, with a side of the ridiculously expensive artisanal pickles he loved. It was a stupid, wifely gesture, a desperate attempt to bridge the growing chasm between us. A chasm I had, until that moment, attributed to the pressures of his burgeoning career. I pushed the door open wider, my cheerful surprise dying on my lips. And there she was, my sister, Vivian. Her auburn hair, a fiery cascade that had always been her trademark, was spilling over Oliver's shoulder as she straddled his lap in his executive chair. Their mouths were locked together with the desperate hunger of new lovers, her perfectly manicured fingers tangled in his dark, styled hair, his hands gripping her waist like he owned her. They didn't hear me enter. They were too lost in each other. A private island in the middle of a Monday afternoon. Too lost to notice the woman who had been married to one of them for 2 years, who had shared Thanksgiving dinners and childhood secrets with the other, for 28 years of sisterhood. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, watching my entire life crumble into dust. The sound in the room seemed to fade, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The lunch bag suddenly felt impossibly heavy, a monument to my own naivety. Then, as if sensing a shift in the atmosphere, Vivian opened her eyes. She saw me over Oliver's shoulder. She didn't gasp. She didn't scramble away in shame. She didn't even look surprised. She smiled. It was a small, triumphant little smirk, the same one she flashed as a child when she'd managed to snatch the last cookie, or talk her way out of trouble, leaving me to take the blame. My name is Elena Hartwell, and until that moment, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was the wife who packed homemade lunches and left encouraging notes in briefcases. I was a sister who never missed a birthday call and always offered a shoulder to cry on. I was the quiet one, the steady one, the reliable one. I was also, apparently, a fool. Oh, Vivian said, her voice smooth as silk. She finally slid off Oliver's lap, but made no effort to fix her disheveled appearance. Her designer blouse was slightly askew, her lipstick smudged. She looked radiant, flushed with a victory I hadn't even known I was competing for. Elena, you're early. Early. As if this were a scheduled appointment. As if I had somehow inconvenienced them by walking into my own husband's office. Oliver straightened his tie with practiced calm, the same methodical way he did before a client meeting. His gray eyes, the ones I'd fallen in love with during our late-night study sessions at Northwestern, met mine. There was no guilt in them, not a flicker of remorse. There wasn't even defiance. It was something far worse, indifference. It was the look you give a stranger on the street, a mild annoyance you've already forgotten. We need to talk, he said, his voice flat, as if those 4 words could somehow make sense of the tableau I had just witnessed, as if they were a neat and tidy explanation for the demolition of my world. About what? The words came out strangled, barely recognizable as my own voice. My throat felt like it was closing in on itself. About how long this has been going on. About how many times you've... Elena, please. Vivian's voice cut through my fractured sentence. It carried that familiar note of condescension she perfected in childhood, the one she used when she was about to explain why her wants were more important than my needs. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder than it needs to be. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. I stared at her. Really looked at her. Vivian had always been the beautiful one. The confident one. The one who could walk into any room and command attention. At 30. 2 years younger than me. She had always acted like she was decades wiser. Today, perched on the edge of the plush leather couch while Oliver remained behind his fortress of a desk, she looked like a queen who had just secured her throne. How long? I asked again. My voice a hollow echo in the suddenly cavernous office. Oliver and Vivian exchanged a look. The kind of intimate, conspiratorial glance that lovers share. A secret language I was not privy to. It hit me like a physical blow, knocking the last of the air from my lungs. 8 months. Oliver said finally. His liar voice was cool and measured, as if he were stating a fact in a legal brief. 8 months. The number hung in the air, sharp and cruel. My mind raced backward. A frantic flipbook of memories. 8 months ago was my birthday. My 32nd birthday party. The one we'd hosted in our Lincoln Park home. The one where Vivian had worn that stunning red dress and charmed all of Oliver's colleagues, laughing at their jokes and making them feel like the most important people in the room. The one where she'd stayed late to help clean up while Oliver and I had a quiet, tense argument in the kitchen about his increasingly long work hours. The one where I'd actually hugged her at the end of the night, my heart swelling with gratitude, and thanked her for being such a wonderful, supportive sister. 8 months. I repeated numbly. The roast beef sandwich in the bag felt like a stone. Look, Elena, Vivian said, crossing her long legs as if she were settling in for a casual chat over coffee. I know this is a shock, but honestly, it's probably for the best. You and Oliver, you've been growing apart for ages. Everyone can see it. Everyone. Our marriage was already over, Oliver added, chiming in with the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. This just accelerated things. The audacity was breathtaking. They sat there, the two people I trusted most in the world, dissecting my marriage like it was a business merger that had simply run its course. There were no apologies. No stumbling explanations about how it had happened. No expressions of regret for the pain they were causing. Just matter-of-fact cruelty. Delivered with the casual indifference of people discussing the weather. They had already written the narrative, and in their version, I was merely a footnote in their great love story. A strange calm washed over me then. A cold, hard clarity that pushed the tears back down. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a slow-burning ember of something else. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I want you out of the house, I said to Oliver. I was surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. It sounded like someone else. Someone stronger. He laughed. He actually laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. Just a short, dismissive chuckle. Elena, it's my house. My name is on the deed. I bought it before we were married. You'll be the one leaving. Of course. The premarital asset. He was a lawyer. After all, he'd always been meticulous about details. And where exactly am I supposed to go? I asked. The cold calm beginning to fracture. Vivian and Oliver exchanged another one of those looks. That secret. Shared language. It was clear they had already discussed this. They had a plan. A plan for me. Actually, Vivian said, her voice softening into a tone of fox concern that was more insulting than her earlier condescension. I've been thinking about that. Mom's been saying she's lonely in that big house in Evanston since Dad passed. Maybe this is a perfect time for you to move back home. Help take care of her. Move back home. At 32. After building a life here what I thought was a life and a career, they wanted me to slink back to my childhood bedroom like a failure. To become a caretaker for the mother who, I was beginning to suspect, had already chosen a side. Mom knows? The question escaped before I could stop it. A raw, wounded sound. Vivian's smile widened. It was a slow, deliberate expression of victory. I told her yesterday. She understands. She always said Oliver was too good for she caught herself. But the damage was done. The arrow had found its mark. Too good for me? My own mother thought my husband was too good for me. The words echoed in the silent, sunlit office. She's actually excited about the idea of us all being a family. Vivian continued, breezing past her slip-up as if it were nothing. She said it's about time Oliver found someone who could match his ambition. The room seemed to tilt. My vision swam. It wasn't just an affair. It was a coup. A carefully orchestrated takeover of my life. They hadn't just been carrying on for months. They'd been planning. They'd involved my mother. My own mother. In their conspiracy. They had already made plans for my displacement. Already decided how to restructure everyone's lives around their betrayal. With me as the only casualty. I looked at Oliver. Really looked at him. The man I'd supported through law school. Staying up all night to help him prep for the bar exam. The man who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health. Who'd whispered that I was his everything on our wedding night under a canopy of twinkling lights. He was checking his phone. He was bored. This conversation, this monumental, life-shattering moment for me, was boring him. I need some air. I managed to say, my body moving on autopilot toward the door. The lunch bag was still in my hand. I dropped it on the floor with a soft thud. A final, pathetic offering at the altar of our dead marriage. Elena. Wait. Oliver called out as I reached for the doorknob. His voice was suddenly all business again. We should discuss the practical things. The divorce. The division of assets. Assets? I turned back to face him. A bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling up in my chest. What assets? Oliver? Everything's in your name. Remember? You insisted on it. For tax purposes. He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. His gaze flickered away from mine for the first time. Well, yes. But we can work something out. I'm not unreasonable. Unreasonable. The man who had been sleeping with my sister for 8 months, who had just informed me my own mother thought I was a disappointment, was worried about being perceived as unreasonable. I left without another word. I walked through the opulent lobby of Sterling and Finch, past the smiling receptionists and the important-looking men in expensive suits, feeling like a ghost. The world outside was bright and loud. The sounds of Chicago traffic a jarring contrast to the silent implosion of my life. The drive home to Lincoln Park was a blur of tears and rage and a strange, detached numbness that felt like walking through a dream. Our house, Liver's house, apparently sat at the end of a quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac. It was a classic Chicago brownstone we'd chosen together, because we talked about filling the extra bedrooms with children someday. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes. Staring at the front door with its cheerful yellow paint and the flower boxes I'd planted last spring, now filled with wilting mums. Everything looked exactly the same. But I felt like an alien visiting someone else's life, a life that had been a lie. I finally forced myself to go inside. The house held all the evidence of my delusion. A framed wedding photo on the mantelpiece. The two of us smiling. Disgustingly happy. My watercolor paintings mixed with his law journals on the bookshelves. The coffee mug I'd used that very morning, still sitting in the sink. A faint lipstick stain on the rim like a blood stain at a crime scene. It was a museum of a life that had never really been mine. My hand shook as I picked up my phone. I had to hear it from her myself. I had to know. I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. Elena. Honey. Her voice was carefully, unnaturally neutral. Vivian said you might be calling. She told you everything. I asked. My voice flat. She told me enough. My mother replied. A sigh traveling through the line. Oh, sweetheart. I know this is hard. But sometimes these things just happen. Oliver and Vivian. They just make sense together. They're both so ambitious. Both so successful. I'm successful. I interrupted. The words tasting like ash. I have my own business. Real clients. Designing wedding invitations isn't exactly. I do corporate branding. Mom. For architectural firms. For tech startups. You know that. Of course you do. Honey. But let's be honest. Vivian moves in Oliver's world. She understands his pressures. His goals. Maybe this is just natural selection. Natural selection. My mother was treating my marriage, my heart, my life, like a nature documentary where the weaker animal gets called from the herd. So, you're taking her side. The question was a whisper. I'm not taking sides. Elena. I'm being realistic. You and Oliver have been having problems for a year. Everyone could see it. And Vivian, well, she didn't plan this. Love just happened. Love. They were calling it love. This ugly, calculated act of betrayal. They were wrapping it in a pretty bow and calling it love. Where am I supposed to live? Mom? I asked. The last vestiges of my hope crumbling. Well, you know you're always welcome here. Your old room is exactly the same as you left it. And honestly, I could use the help. The house is getting too big for me to manage alone. There it was. The consolation prize. After my husband was stolen by my sister, I could return home to be my mother's unpaid live-in caretaker. My future. Neatly packaged and presented to me. I need to think, I said, my voice cracking. Of course. Dear. Take all the time you need, she said, her tone softening now that she delivered the verdict. But Elena, try not to make this ugly. For everyone's sake. For everyone's sake. Not my sake. Everyone else's. I hung up the phone and walked to the kitchen cabinet where we kept the wine. I poured a glass of Cabernet. Then another. Then a third. By the time Oliver came home at 9:30, looking every bit the conquering hero, I was sitting in the dark living room with an empty bottle and a head full of terrible, blinding clarity. The fog of grief and shock was finally lifting, and what lay beneath was cold, hard, and sharp as a shard of glass. Elena, he said carefully, loosening his silk tie as he stepped into the living room. The dim light from a single table lamp cast long shadows across his face, making his handsome features look sharp and unfamiliar. We need to discuss logistics, the practical aspects of this transition. He used the word transition as if I were moving from one department to another at a company, not being violently ejected from my own life. I didn't say anything. I just watched him, my silence a heavy blanket in the room. I've already spoken to my lawyer, he continued, placing his expensive leather briefcase on the floor. He was all business, his earlier flicker of discomfort in the office completely gone. Your lawyer, I repeated, my voice devoid of emotion. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A fact. Of course he had a lawyer. He probably had one on retainer since the day Vivian first sat on his lap. Elena, please don't repeat everything I say. It's childish. Childish. The woman whose life he had just systematically destroyed was being childish for pointing out the obvious. The audacity was a physical force, pressing down on me. But the wine, or perhaps the rage, had created a strange sort of armor around my heart. I felt oddly detached, an observer in my own tragedy. I've drawn up a reasonable settlement offer, he said, pulling a crisp manila folder from his briefcase. He held it out to me. Considering that most of our assets are premarital or in my name, I'm prepared to be generous. Generous. He used that word as if he were a king bestowing a favor upon a peasant. I took the folder. My fingers felt numb. I flipped through the pages without reading them. Just columns of text and numbers that meant nothing and everything all at once. How much? I asked, my eyes still on the meaningless words. $25,000. He said. It's more than fair. Considering. Considering what? I finally looked up at him. My gaze hard. Considering you've been sleeping with my sister for 8 months? Elena, I understand you're hurt. Hurt? I stood up, surprised by my own steadiness. The room didn't spin. My legs felt solid beneath me. I'm not hurt. Oliver. Hurt is when someone accidentally steps on your foot. This is devastation. This is a complete annihilation of everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and you. My voice was low and clear, each word a carefully placed stone. Look, these things happen, he said, shifting his weight, a sign of impatience. People grow apart. People change. What Vivian and I have, it's real. It's something I've never experienced before. What about what we had? The question was a formality. I already knew his answer. We were friends who got married because it seemed like the right time, he said, the casual cruelty of his honesty like a slap. But Elena, be honest. When was the last time you looked at me the way Vivian does? When was the last time we had a conversation about anything deeper than grocery lists and weekend plans? The terrible thing was, he wasn't entirely wrong. We had grown apart. We had fallen into the comfortable, dangerous routines of a marriage that had lost its spark. But I thought that was normal. The natural evolution from passionate romance to a comfortable partnership. I thought it was something you worked on, not something you threw away for a shinier, newer model. Especially not when that model was your wife's own sister. So that gave you the right to cheat? I asked. I didn't plan this. Neither did Vivian. It just happened. For 8 months? I stated. It just happened. Over and over again. He sighed. A sound of profound exasperation. As if I were a difficult client he was trying to manage. Elena, please, don't make this more difficult than it has to be. There was that phrase again. The family motto. Don't make this difficult. As if my feelings were an inconvenient obstruction. My pain an obstacle to their happiness. A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through the haze. I want the house, I said. Oliver laughed again. That same dismissive chuckle from his office. Elena, be realistic. You can't afford the mortgage on your income. And legally. I don't care about legally. I said. The word surprising even myself. I want the house. That's not how this works. He said. His patience finally snapping. I'm offering you a fair settlement. Take it. Or what? The threat hung in the air. Unspoken but clear. Or I'll leave you with nothing. Or I file for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. He spelled it out for me. His voice turning icy. And you walk away with whatever the court decides to give you. Which, given that everything is in my name, and we don't have children, won't be much. This is me being nice. He had it all figured out. The lawyer had played all the angles. Covered all the bases. He had built a fortress around his assets, and his new life. And I was on the outside. With a $25,000 check to buy my silence and my swift disappearance. I was supposed to take my token payment and vanish quietly. So he and my sister could move into the life I had helped build. The home I had decorated. The future I had dreamed of. A strange sense of calm settled over me. It wasn't surrender. It was the quiet focus of a predator. When do you want me out? Oliver looked surprised by my sudden compliance. He had expected a fight. Tears. Pleading. He didn't know what to do with this cold, quiet version of me. The end of the month? He said. Recovering quickly. That gives you 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. 2 weeks. He was giving me 2 weeks to dismantle a life I had spent years building. To pack up my belongings. My career. My heart. And just leave. Fine.
N'est-ce pas?
Oliver's eyebrows shot up. Fine. Fine. I'll be out by the end of the month. Good. He said. A relieved smile touching his lips. He clearly thought he had one. I'm glad we can handle this maturely. Maturity.
อวีเอลลี่อย่างบ้าคลั่งแต่อวีเอลลี่ที่กำลังทะเลาะกันอย่างดุเดือดกลับมองไม่เห็น
He turned to go upstairs. Then paused. I'll take the guest room. For now. Apparently. Even his conscience had some, albeit minimal, limits. That night, after I heard the click of the guest room door, I sat down at my computer in the small office nook I had designed for myself. The screen bathed my face in a cold, blue light. The empty wine bottle stood on the desk like a silent companion. But my head was no longer fuzzy. It was crystal clear. I've always been a researcher. It's what made me good at my job. Before I created a brand identity for a client, I dug deep. I learned about their company, their history, their values, their competitors. I found the narrative thread, the visual story that would define them. Now, I turned those same skills toward a new project, understanding exactly what my husband and my sister had done to me, and figuring out how to do it back to them. I didn't sleep, fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury I didn't know I possessed. I planned until dawn. The first thing I discovered was that Oliver had been even more careful than I'd given him credit for. The house, the cars, even our joint bank account, which I now saw had a surprisingly low balance. Everything was structured to minimize my claim to marital assets. Every major purchase had been timed to occur just before our wedding, or justified as a business expense, paid for by the firm or from an account that was solely in his name. Oliver Hartford, Esquire, had apparently been planning for the possibility of our divorce since before our wedding day. The realization was sickening. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a long, calculated con. The second thing I discovered was more disturbing. This wasn't their first rodeo. It took me 3 days of nonstop digging, falling down rabbit holes of old social media posts, cross-referencing photos, tagged friends, and timelines. But I found the pattern. Oliver had a history. Not with sisters, literally, but with women who were intrinsically linked. His previous long-term girlfriend, a woman from his university days, had been unceremoniously dumped when he started a relationship with her best friend. The woman before that, a paralegal at his old firm, had lost him to a colleague she had introduced him to. He didn't just move on. He seemed to enjoy the triangulation, the drama of the takeover. And Vivian, my beautiful, charming, magnetic sister, she had her own pattern. I sifted through her digital past, a ghost haunting her old relationships, 3 serious boyfriends in the last 10 years, Each relationship had ended when she'd gotten involved with men who were already attached. A married professor in college, a boss with a long-term fiancé, an artist who was engaged to one of her friends. She collected unavailable men the way some people collected vintage wine. They hadn't fallen in love. They had found each other. To predators who enjoyed the hunt more than the prize. And I was the prize. I was still processing the stomach-churning revelation when the doorbell rang a few days later. I looked through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. It was Vivian. She stood on my front porch holding a bottle of expensive-looking Chardonnay, and wearing an expression of what I could only describe as aggressive sympathy. "Elena, we need to talk," she said when I opened the door. "Do we?" I asked. My voice flat. "Can I come in?" She didn't wait for an answer. Brushing past me into the foyer, she took in the half-packed boxes in the living room with a flick of her eyes. She settled onto my couch, one I'd picked out. In the house she was about to live in, and poured 2 glasses of the wine without asking. She pushed one across the coffee table toward me. I left it there. "I know you hate me right now," she began, her voice soft and placating. "Actually, I don't," I said. Surprising both of us. "I'm not sure what I feel. It's colder than hate." "Good," she said, choosing to interpret my words in her favor. "Because I really think we can work through this. As sisters. As sisters." The casual, breathtaking entitlement was staggering. Oliver and I, we never meant for it to happen. She continued, launching into a well-rehearsed speech. "But Elena, you have to admit, you two weren't happy. You haven't been happy for months. Were you planning to tell me? Ever?" "Of course." She lied smoothly. We wanted to be sure. We didn't want to hurt you unnecessarily if it wasn't going to work out." "How considerate. Elena, don't be sarcastic. It doesn't suit you," she chided gently. Vivian sipped her wine and studied me with a calculating look I was beginning to recognize. It was the look of a strategist assessing her opponent. "The thing is, Oliver and I are good together. Really good. We challenge each other intellectually. We have the same goals, the same interests, the same complete lack of a moral compass." I finished for her. "See? This is what I mean," she said, shaking her head in mock disappointment. "This bitter, vindictive side of you. It's not attractive, Elena. It's part of why things fell apart with Oliver in the first place." I stared at her, my mouth agape. "You're blaming me for your affair." "I'm not blaming anyone," she said, her voice a soothing balm of poison. "I'm just saying that maybe if you'd put more effort into your marriage, if you tried to grow with Oliver instead of staying static." I stayed static. "Elena, when was the last time you read a book that wasn't a romance novel? When was the last time you had an opinion about politics or current events or anything that mattered?" Oliver needs intellectual stimulation. He needs a partner who can keep up with him. The casual cruelty of it was a masterpiece. She was sitting in my living room, drinking wine from my glasses, about to move into my house with my husband, and she was patiently explaining to me exactly why I deserved it. She was rewriting history, painting me as a dull, simple-minded housewife who had failed to keep her brilliant husband entertained. "What do you want, Vivian?" I asked, cutting through her monologue. "I want us to be okay," she said, her smile returning. "I want you to understand that this isn't about you not being good enough. It's just about compatibility. Oliver and I are compatible in ways that you and he never were." "And what about you and I? Are we compatible? As sisters?" Vivian's smile was radiant. "Of course. We are. We're family. This doesn't change that. This doesn't change that." I repeated slowly, the words feeling alien in my mouth. "Elena, I know it's hard to see right now, but in the long run, this is going to be good for everyone. You'll find someone who's better suited to you, someone who appreciates your simpler qualities. And Oliver and I can build something real together." "Simpler qualities. You know what I mean," she said, seeing the look on my face. "You're nurturing and sweet and domestic. That's wonderful. But it's not what Oliver needs. He needs someone who can match his ambition. Someone who understands his world. Someone like you." I said. "Exactly." Vivian finished her wine and checked her phone. A picture of effortless importance. "I should go. Oliver's picking me up for dinner. We're meeting with the senior partners at his firm." She was already playing the role. The perfect lawyer's wife. Networking. Positioning. Conquering. Meanwhile, I was expected to gracefully exit stage left, clutching my check for $25,000. "Elena," She paused at the door, turning back to deliver her parting shot. Try not to make this harder than it has to be. For everyone's sake. There it was again. The family motto. After she left, the wine glass she'd used sitting accusingly on my coffee table, I sat in the silent living room and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. And it wasn't heartbreak. It was something cleaner, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the absolute, unshakable clarity of a woman with nothing left to lose. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. Margaret Reeves had the kind of presence that made opposing counsel nervous. Before she even said a word. At 55, she was silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for taking on cases that other lawyers considered unwinnable. Her office, overlooking the Chicago River from the 32nd floor of a gleaming skyscraper in River North, was a testament to her success. It was minimalist and modern, dominated by a huge abstract painting in shades of black and red. Her fees, I soon learned, reflected her success rate. I'd found her name through a frantic Google search for best divorce attorneys in Chicago, then spent 2 days reading every article, every case summary, every client testimonial I could find. She specialized in what she called high-conflict marital dissolution, which was a polite way of saying she was a shark who thrived in bloody water. She was exactly what I needed. Ms. Hartwell, she said, her voice a low, commanding alto. She wasn't looking at me, but at the settlement offer Oliver had given me, which lay on her expansive glass desk. She held it with 2 fingers, as if it were a soiled tissue. Your husband's proposal is insulting. He says it's generous. I mumbled, feeling small in the cavernous leather chair across from her. He's lying, she stated flatly, finally lifting her gaze to meet mine. Her eyes were a piercing shade of blue, and they seemed to see right through me. In a marriage of 2 years in the state of Illinois, even with a pre-existing asset like the house, a dual-income household implies a partnership. You're entitled to significantly more than this. The fact that he structured everything to minimize your claim so meticulously suggests premeditation. Premeditation. The word sent a chill down my spine. He's been planning for this divorce since before you married, she said, her tone matter-of-fact. Look at the timeline you gave me. Every major purchase, every financial decision, every asset transfer. This man has been protecting himself from a future divorce settlement since day one. He wasn't building a marriage, Ms. Hartwell. He was building an exit strategy. I felt sick. The late nights I'd spent supporting him, the sacrifices I'd made for his career, the future I thought we were building together, it had all been a sham. He had never intended for it to be permanent. He was just playing a role until it was no longer convenient. Margaret leaned back in her chair, the leather groaning softly. She studied me, her expression unreadable. The question is, what do you want from this divorce? I want what's fair, I said, the words sounding weak even to my own ears. Fair is subjective, she countered. Fair is a word people use when they don't know what to ask for. I'm asking what you want. I thought about it. What did I want? The house? The money? Revenge? The images flashed through my mind, Vivian's triumphant smirk, Oliver's indifferent gaze, my mother's disappointed sigh. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the dismissal, the casual cruelty, the assumption that I would just disappear. I want them to understand that I'm not going to disappear quietly, I said, my voice gaining strength. I want them to know that they can't just erase me. I want them to pay for what they did. Margaret smiled for the first time since I'd entered her office. It was a thin, dangerous smile. Now we're getting somewhere. Tell me about your sister. So I told her. I told her everything. The affair. The timeline. The casual cruelty of their confession. Vivian's complete lack of remorse. Her condescending lecture in my own living room. I told her about my mother's reaction. About the natural selection comment. About the family plan to ship me back to my childhood bedroom. I laid out the entire, ugly story, feeling the shame and humiliation wash over me again. But this time, it was different. In Margaret's quiet, powerful presence, my story didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like evidence. Interesting, Margaret said when I finished, making a note on a yellow legal pad. Your sister works in PR. Fashion PR. You said. Yes. She represents several high-end designers. She's very good at networking, building her brand. And she's already building a relationship with your husband's law firm colleagues. Margaret mused, positioning herself as a perfect lawyer's wife. Ambitious. That's what my mother said. Margaret made another note. What about social media? Are they being discreet about their relationship? I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots I had obsessively taken over the past few days. Oliver and Vivian at a gallery opening in the West Loop. Oliver and Vivian at a fundraising dinner for his firm. Oliver and Vivian laughing together at a trendy restaurant in Fulton Market. They were always with a group. Always carefully staged to look professional. But there was an intimacy in the way they stood too close. The way his hand lingered on the small of her back. The way she looked at him. It would be obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. They're being careful, Margaret observed, her eyes scanning the photos. But not careful enough. What do you mean? Your husband is a junior partner at a prestigious firm like Sterling and Finch. Image matters in his profession. Family values. Stability. Trustworthiness. These things affect his advancement prospects. His relationship with the senior partners. His ability to attract high-value clients. She paused, letting the words sink in. And having a messy public affair with his wife's sister, while simultaneously manipulating marital assets to screw said wife out of a fair settlement. That's not going to play well with the old guard. I felt a spark of something that might have been hope. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling. So what can we do? We reject his insulting offer, she said, tapping the folder on her desk. We file for divorce on grounds of adultery. We demand a full forensic accounting of all marital and non-marital assets. We subpoena communications between your husband and your sister to establish the timeline of their affair and any collusion. Will that help me get a better settlement? It will make his life, and by extension your sister's life, very, very uncomfortable, Margaret said, her smile returning. And discomfort. Ms. Hartwell has a way of making people much more reasonable about settlements. It opens their checkbooks. Margaret's retainer fee was steep. It was almost everything I had in my personal savings account. The money I carefully squirreled away from my freelance projects. Handing over that check would leave me practically broke. But as I looked at the fierce intelligence in Margaret's eyes, I knew it was the best investment I could ever make. It was an investment in myself. One more thing, Margaret said as I prepared to leave, a thoughtful expression on her face. You mentioned that your sister's career depends heavily on her reputation in the fashion industry. A world built on image and perception. Yes, I confirmed. Reputation is everything to her. Why? No reason, Margaret said, her expression perfectly bland. Just thinking about all our options. Oliver received the divorce papers on a Monday morning. At his office. I knew this because Margaret had arranged for a professional process server to deliver them, rather than using certified mail. Maximum embarrassment value. She had called it. I also knew because Oliver called me within an hour. His voice, for the first time, not calm or condescending, but shaking with rage. Elena, what the hell is this? He practically shouted into the phone. Divorce papers, I said calmly, picturing him standing in his glass-walled office, the eyes of his colleagues on him. I thought that's what you wanted. Grounds of adultery. Forensic accounting. You're demanding half of everything, including the house. I'm demanding what I'm legally entitled to. Oliver, my lawyer seems to think your initial offer was insulting. We had an agreement. He roared. We had your unilateral proposal. I corrected him. I've decided to decline. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. The sound sharp and angry. Elena, you're making a mistake. A big one. This is going to get ugly. It's already ugly. Oliver, I said, my voice steady. I'm just deciding not to pretend otherwise. I won't let you destroy my career over this. I'm not trying to destroy your career. I'm trying to get a fair divorce settlement. By dragging our private business through the courts. By making me look like what? Oliver? I asked softly. Like a man who cheated on his wife with her sister? Another pause. This one even more charged. If you think you can embarrass me into giving you more money, you're wrong. I don't want to embarrass you, Oliver, I said. A lie that tasted sweet on my tongue. But I'm not going to be bullied into disappearing quietly so you can start your new life, without any consequences. Elena, listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. If you proceed with this lawsuit, I will make sure you regret it. I have resources. I have connections. You don't want to make an enemy of me. Are you threatening me? Oliver, I'm warning you. He hissed. Back down. Take the settlement offer and walk away. Or this gets much worse for you. I hung up on him. My hand was shaking. But I felt a strange thrill. The lion had finally shown his teeth, which meant he was scared. Within 2 hours, Vivian was at my door. The real one this time. To the brownstone I was still packing up. Unlike her previous visit, she wasn't bringing wine or wearing a sympathetic expression. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Elena, you have to stop this, she said, pushing past me into the house. Stop what? Vivian. This ridiculous lawsuit. Do you have any idea what you're doing to Oliver's reputation? To his career? I'm getting divorced, I said simply. It's a fairly common procedure. You're not getting divorced. You're waging a war. You're being vindictive and petty. And it's going to backfire on you spectacularly. She paced my living room, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood floors. Oliver has friends. Elena. Important friends. Judges. Prosecutors. Other powerful lawyers. You can't win a fight against someone with his connections. Watch me, I said quietly. Vivian stopped pacing and stepped closer to me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of real worry in her eyes. Behind the anger, it wasn't concern for me. It was fear for herself, for the perfect life she was trying to steal. Elena, I'm trying to help you, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If you keep pushing this, Oliver is going to destroy you. He's not bluffing. He'll make sure you never work as a graphic designer in this city again. He'll ruin your credit. He'll make sure you can't even rent a decent apartment. She paused for effect. He will make you a nobody. Is that what I am to you? A nobody? Someone who was just in the way. That's not what I meant, she snapped, her composure slipping. That's exactly what you both meant, I said, my voice rising with a strength I didn't know I had. You've decided I'm disposable. A piece of furniture to be moved out of the house. You think I should be grateful for whatever scraps you're willing to throw me, and then disappear so you can live happily ever after. Well, I'm not disappearing. Elena, please, think about what you're doing, she pleaded, the desperation now clear in her voice. Think about Mom. Think about the family. I am thinking about the family. Vivian, I said, stepping toward her, forcing her to take a step back. I'm thinking about what kind of family destroys one of their own, and then demands she be grateful for it. Vivian's mask of concern slipped completely, revealing the ugly, snarling face beneath. Fine, she hissed. You want to play hardball? Oliver isn't the only one with connections. I work in fashion and PR. Elena, I know photographers, journalists, powerful social media influencers. I can make your life very difficult, too. Is that a threat? Vivian. It's a promise, she said, her eyes flashing with malice. Stop this lawsuit, or we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of bitter, jealous person you really are. What kind of person am I? Vivian. The kind who tries to destroy her own sister's happiness out of spite. I stared at her, really looked at her. The beautiful, confident woman who had always been everything I wasn't. And for the first time in my life, I saw her clearly. She wasn't confident. She was desperate. She wasn't successful. She was parasitic. She didn't win by being better. She won by taking what belonged to other people. She was hollow. Get out of my house, I said quietly. Elena, get out. My voice was as cold and hard as steel. She stared at me for a moment, shocked by my tone, then turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence she left behind was profound. I took a deep, shaky breath, then picked up my phone and called Margaret. They're rattled, I told her, my voice trembling slightly but firm. They're both threatening to retaliate. I heard Margaret smile on the other end of the line. Good, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Rattled people make mistakes. Oliver says he has connections that can ruin me professionally. I relayed to Margaret, pacing back and forth across my living room, which was now a chaotic maze of half-packed boxes. And Vivian, she threatened to use her PR contacts to damage my reputation. Let them try, Margaret said, her voice a calm anchor in my sea of anxiety. Discovery goes both ways. Ms. Hartwell, if they want to play dirty, we'll subpoena their communication symbols, text messages, everything. Conspiracy to defame a spouse during divorce proceedings doesn't look good in front of a judge, especially when one of the conspirators is an officer of the court. She paused. Document everything. Every threat. every attempt at intimidation, every unwanted phone call or visit. Your husband may be a lawyer, but he's not thinking like one right now. He's thinking like a guilty man who's been caught and is lashing out. That makes him predictable and vulnerable. The 2 weeks Oliver had given me to vacate the house passed in a blur of packing tape, bubble wrap, and emotional exhaustion. Every object I touched was a memory, a small piece of the life I was being forced to leave behind. The hand-painted ceramic mugs we bought on our honeymoon in Italy, the worn armchair where I used to curl up and read while he worked late, the photos of us smiling, laughing, looking for all the world like a couple in love. Packing it all away felt like presiding over the funeral of my own life. I found a small, temporary apartment in Lakeview through a friend of a friend. It was a sterile, furnished place with beige walls and generic art, a purgatory where I could store my boxes and my broken heart while the legal storm raged on. Moving day was bleak. I'd hired two movers, and as they carried my life out of the brownstone, I felt a profound sense of dislocation. This house had been my home, the center of my universe. Now, it was just a crime scene. The day after I moved out, Vivian posted a photo on Instagram. It was a selfie of her and Oliver, beaming, standing in front of my yellow front door. He had his arm wrapped around her, a proprietary look on his face. The caption read, "New beginnings." There were already dozens of comments from their friends, a chorus of congratulations and heart emojis. No one seemed to question the timeline. No one seemed to wonder where I was. I was a ghost, already erased. I took a screenshot and sent it to Margaret with a one-word message evidence. The legal battle dragged on. Margaret was true to her word. She filed motion after motion, demanding financial records, communication logs, and deposition dates. Oliver's lawyer, a slick corporate type named Patterson, responded with delays and objections. It was a slow, grinding war of attrition, designed to wear me down and bleed me dry financially. But they underestimated me. They underestimated Margaret, and they underestimated the power of the truth. The first crack in their perfect, impenetrable fortress came from an unexpected source, Oliver's own law firm. 2 weeks after the first flurry of legal filings, Margaret received a call from Daniel Sterling, the firm's most senior partner. He was a legal legend in Chicago, a man whose name was synonymous with power and influence. He was requesting a meeting. What does that mean? I asked Margaret over the phone, my heart pounding. It means Oliver's bosses are worried about bad press, she explained, a note of satisfaction in her voice. A messy divorce involving adultery, financial manipulation, and a partner behaving like a thug doesn't reflect well on the firm's carefully cultivated image of integrity and stability. They don't like messes. So, they're pressuring him to settle. They're pressuring him to make this go away. Margaret corrected, quickly and quietly, which gives us leverage. A lot of leverage. The second crack came from Vivian's world. It was subtle at first. A friend of mine who works in marketing mentioned hearing whispers at an industry event, rumors about Vivian's unprofessional conduct. Then, a week later, I got a call from an old acquaintance who ran a boutique clothing line. "Elena, this is kind of awkward," she began. "But I thought you should know. We were in talks with Vivian to handle our fall campaign PR. We just pulled out." "Oh," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Yeah. Someone sent our board an anonymous email. It had links to, well, to the public court filings in your divorce. The ones mentioning her by name. Adultery. You know, our brand is all about empowering women. The optics are just terrible. We can't be associated with that." She paused. "To other brands I know have got the same email. She's becoming toxic." After I hung up, I stared out the window of my sad little apartment. Was Margaret behind this? I called and asked her. "I am behind the legal strategy, Ms. Hartwell," she replied, her voice carefully precise. "I can't control what other people choose to do with publicly available information." "What public information?" "Divorce filings are public record," she explained patiently. "Court documents detailing claims of adultery are public record. If a concerned citizen chose to research those records and share relevant information with your sister's professional contacts, well, that's not illegal. It's just informative." I was beginning to understand why Margaret Reeves commanded such high fees. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was a grandmaster of chess, thinking 10 moves ahead while her opponents were still fumbling with the pieces. The third crack was the most surprising, and in a way, the most satisfying. The phone rang one evening. and the caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in years. It was Heidi Hartford, Oliver's mother. During our marriage, she had never been particularly warm to me, maintaining a polite but distinct distance. I braced myself for a lecture, for a defense of her perfect son. "Elena, dear," she said, her voice sounding genuinely distressed. "I just heard about the situation." "The situation?" I repeated numbly. "About Oliver. And your sister." She took a shaky breath. "I want you to know that I had no idea. I am absolutely, utterly horrified. I did not raise my son to behave this way. His father," her voice broke slightly, "would be rolling over in his grave." "Thank you, Heidi," I said, genuinely touched. That means a lot to me. He told me you two were handling things amicably," she said, the word dripping with scorn. "He conveniently left out the part about his affair. I had to hear it from my sister, who read about it on some gossip blog that covers the Chicago legal scene." "A gossip blog?" Margaret was a true artist. "Elena," she said, her voice firming up, "I know this is presumptuous, and it's not my place, but I hope you'll fight for what you deserve. Don't let him push you around. Don't you dare let him get away with this." After I hung up, a slow, sad smile spread across my face. Oliver hadn't just betrayed a wife. He had betrayed his own family's values. He had lost the respect of his mother. His colleagues were starting to see him as a liability, and his carefully constructed world was beginning to fracture under the pressure. The pressure was building, and it was only a matter of time before something gave way completely. In the midst of the legal chaos, I clung to the one thing that was still mine, my work. I threw myself into my graphic design projects with a ferocity I hadn't felt in years. Before Oliver, my business had been my passion. During my marriage, it had slowly become a hobby, something I did on the side. I let his career take precedence. His needs eclipsed my own ambition. Now, with nothing else to hold onto, I rediscovered my love for it. I stayed up late sketching logos. I built beautiful websites. I poured all my pain and rage and newfound clarity into my art. My work became sharper, bolder, more confident. I was finding my voice again, not just in my personal life, but in my professional one, too. One of my clients was a nonprofit organization that provided support for women leaving abusive situations. I was redesigning their website and branding materials, working with their director, a compassionate, fiery woman named Maria. Wasn't education? I listened to stories of women who had faced situations far more dire than my own women, dealing with physical abuse, financial ruin, and custody battles designed to crush their spirits. Yet, they had survived. They had fought back. They were rebuilding. "You know," Maria said to me one afternoon as we reviewed a new logo concept, "your story isn't that different from theirs. Betrayal is a form of abuse. Elena, financial manipulation is a form of abuse. It's all about power and control." Her words resonated deep within me. I wasn't just a scorned wife. I was a woman fighting back against a system designed to disempower her. The realization was liberating. It galvanized me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was for every woman who had ever been told to be quiet, to not make things difficult, to accept less than she deserved. Meanwhile, the strain was clearly getting to Oliver and Vivian. Their social media presence, once a constant stream of glamorous events and happy couple photos, became sparse. The few pictures that did appear seemed forced. In one, taken at a charity gala, Oliver's smile didn't reach his eyes. Vivian stood beside him, her hand on his arm, looking less like a loving partner and more like a guard. The triumphant glow was gone, replaced by a hard, brittle edge. The comment section was no longer just fawning friends. There were now anonymous accounts asking pointed questions. "Where's Elena?" One asked. "Didn't he just get divorced?" Another commented. The public narrative was slipping from their control. My relationship with my own mother remained frozen in a painful stasis. We exchanged brief, stilted text messages about the weather or her garden, both of us carefully avoiding the massive, unexploded bomb that lay between us. She never asked how I was doing. She never mentioned Oliver or Vivian. It was a cold war of politeness, and every day of her silence was another small betrayal. I realized I was mourning not one, but two family relationships. The sister I thought I had, and the mother I wished I had. The turning point came on a gray Tuesday in November. Margaret called me. "Patterson just requested an official settlement conference," she said. "They're ready to talk. For real this time." What changed? I asked. I imagine Mr. Hartford is tired of his partners giving him the side eye in the hallway. And I imagine your sister is tired of losing clients. Pressure works. Ms. Hartwell. It's time to see how much. The final confrontation was scheduled to happen at the Sterling and Finch offices. On their turf. Margaret had insisted on it. I want them to feel the pressure of their own environment. She'd said. I want Oliver to look around that conference room and see everything he stands to lose. As I got ready that morning, I looked at myself in the mirror of my temporary apartment. The woman looking back was different from the one who had stood in Oliver's office just a few months ago. Her eyes were clearer. Her jaw was set. And the hesitant uncertainty was gone. I wasn't the wife who packed lunches anymore. I wasn't the sister who always forgave. I put on a simple, sharp black dress, styled my hair, and applied my makeup with the precision of a soldier preparing for battle. I was Elena Hartwell, and I was ready for a reckoning. The conference room at Sterling and Finch was a temple of corporate power. It was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Millennium Park and the vast, blue expanse of Lake Michigan. A single, colossal mahogany table dominated the space, polished to such a high sheen that it reflected the gray sky outside like a dark, still lake. It was a room designed to intimidate, to make anyone sitting there feel small and insignificant in the face of such wealth and influence. A few months ago, it would have worked on me. Today, I just saw it for what it was, a stage. Oliver sat on the opposite side of the table, flanked by his lead attorney, Patterson, and a nervous-looking junior associate who seemed to be tasked with taking notes. Oliver looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that even his residual tan couldn't hide. The golden boy lawyer, the man who had breezily informed me that my life was over, was showing the cracks. The strain of the past few months had taken its toll. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. Vivian wasn't there. Her absence was a statement in itself. She was the catalyst for all of this. Yet when it came to the messy, unglamorous business of cleaning it up, she was nowhere to be seen. It was a coward's move, and it told me everything I needed to know about the current state of their real relationship. Margaret sat beside me, a picture of calm, formidable competence. In front of her was a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse. She had arranged her files with a surgeon's precision. She radiated an aura of controlled power that seemed to suck the oxygen out of Oliver's side of the room. Patterson, a thin man with a perpetually pained expression, cleared his throat to begin. Thank you for coming. We are here today in the hopes of reaching an amicable resolution to this unfortunate matter. Let's cut to the chase, shall we? Mr. Patterson. Margaret interrupted, her voice slicing through his platitudes. We're not here for pleasantries. Your client made my client an initial offer of $25,000. My client finds that, and I quote, insulting. So let's dispense with the fiction of amicability and talk numbers. Patterson's lips thinned. Very well. Ms. Reeves, given the short duration of the marriage and the premarital nature of Mr. Hartford's primary assets, we are prepared to revise our offer to $50,000. As a gesture of goodwill, Margaret didn't even blink. She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the table. My client is prepared to accept a settlement of $200,000, half the current assessed value of the marital home, and lifetime alimony of $3,000 per month. The junior associate choked on his water. Patterson let out a sound that was half laugh, half gasp. Ms. Reeves, that's completely unreasonable. It's absurd. The marriage was only 2 years long. There are no children. No court in the state would award that. A court might. Margaret countered smoothly. When presented with documented, irrefutable evidence of adultery and financial manipulation, and a conspiracy between the husband and his paramour, my client's owns hysteria to defraud my client of her fair share of the marital assets. She picked up the top folder from her stack and let it drop onto the table. The sound echoed in the silent room. And that's before we get to the credible threats of retaliation and professional defamation your client and his partner have made, all of which we have documented. She looked directly at Oliver. Your client isn't exactly negotiating from a position of strength. We dispute the characterization of financial manipulation. Patterson blustered, his face turning a blotchy red. Do you? Margaret's smile was razor-sharp. Do you dispute the adultery? Silence. Oliver stared intently at the table's polished surface. Do you dispute that your client systematically structured all marital assets to minimize his wife's potential claims in the event of a divorce, starting before the wedding even took place? More silence. Do you dispute that your client and his paramour, Ms. Vivian Hayes, have made multiple threatening statements regarding my client's reputation and livelihood? Oliver finally spoke, his voice hoarse. He looked at me, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. It was the first time he had made direct eye contact. Elena, please, let's be reasonable here. I am being reasonable. Oliver, I said. My voice is cold and clear as the view from the window. I'm asking for half of what we built together, plus support while I rebuild the life you and my sister demolished. You're offering me less than you pay for a new car. The house alone is worth over $400,000. He argued, his voice rising. You're asking for half of that, plus a cash settlement, plus alimony. That's more than I can afford. Then you should have thought of that before you decided to cheat on me with my sister, I said, the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. His composure finally cracked. The mask of the calm, collected lawyer fell away, revealing the panicked, cornered man beneath. Elena, I'm trying to be fair here, but you're being vindictive, he accused, his voice escalating. This whole lawsuit, this media attention, dragging our personal business through the mud. Media attention, I interrupted. Feigning ignorance, I glanced at Margaret, who gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Play dumb. Don't pretend you don't know. He spat, pointing a trembling finger across the table. Someone's been feeding information to journalists, to bloggers, to social media influencers. My firm is getting calls from reporters asking about my domestic situation. Vivian's lost 3 major clients because of vicious rumors about her personal life. You did this? I looked at Margaret, who maintained a perfectly neutral, almost bored expression. Mr. Hartford, she said calmly, addressing him as if he were a petulant child. If you're concerned about media attention, perhaps you should consider why your story is attracting interest. Affairs happen every day. They don't usually make headlines, not unless there's something particularly newsworthy about them. What's that supposed to mean? Patterson asked, looking nervously between Margaret and Oliver. It means, Margaret continued, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more conspiratorial, that a rising star junior partner at a prestigious law firm, caught manipulating marital assets while conducting a sordid affair with his wife's own sister, makes for very compelling copy, especially when that same lawyer threatens and intimidates his wife for daring to demand a fair settlement. It's a story about power, betrayal, and injustice. People eat that stuff up. Oliver turned pale. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking ghastly under the fluorescent lights. You've been talking to journalists. I don't talk to journalists. Mr. Hartford, Margaret said coolly. My job is to represent my client in a court of law, but I can't control what public records they choose to examine, or what conclusions they draw from those records, or who they might have on speed dial. Patterson leaned forward, his voice a low hiss. Ms. Reeves, if you're suggesting that you've orchestrated some kind of media campaign against my client, that is highly unethical. I'm not suggesting anything. Margaret cut him off, her voice like ice. I'm simply observing that public interest in this case seems to be growing. In fact, she paused, picking up her phone and glancing at the screen as if checking a message. I received a call just yesterday from a producer at Channel 7 News. A woman named Susan Sterling, any relation? Daniel? She asked, glancing at the senior partner's name on the wall. The implication was clear. Apparently, they're considering doing a whole investigative segment for their evening news program. Something about how divorce law can be manipulated by powerful men to financially disadvantage women. They're looking for a compelling, local case to feature. They seem to think yours is perfect. The room went dead quiet. The only sound was a faint hum of the building's ventilation system. Oliver looked like he was going to be sick. The color had completely drained from his face, and he seemed to have shrunk in his expensive suit. The threat of his private humiliation becoming a public spectacle, a feature on the evening news for the entire city of Chicago to see, was a weapon he had never anticipated. He had planned for legal loopholes and financial firewalls. He hadn't planned for a story. Of course, Margaret continued, placing her phone face down on the table with an air of finality. A quick, fair, and very private settlement would eliminate the need for any further media attention. It would make the story, well, old news. My client isn't interested in publicity. She's a private person. She just wants what she's legally and morally entitled to. Oliver stared at me across the vast, polished table. His eyes were wide with a mixture of disbelief, fury, and for the first time, genuine fear. He had always been the one in control, the one who wrote the narrative. Now, the story was being written for him, and he was the villain. Elena, you can't do this, he whispered, the words barely audible. My career. Your career will survive, Oliver, I said. My voice even. It might even be enhanced by showing the world that you can handle a personal adversity with grace and integrity. By doing the right thing. This isn't grace and integrity. He shot back, his voice cracking. This is extortion. No, I said quietly, leaning forward so that only he could hear me. This is consequences. We stared at each other across the polished mahogany divide, and in that moment, I saw it. I saw the exact instant when he realized he had lost. Not just the marriage, not just the money, but the one thing he valued above all else, the narrative. He had expected me to be a footnote in his life story, a sad chapter he could quickly turn past. Instead, I had become the author of his. I had forced him to confront the public, humiliating consequences of his private choices, and it was a story he couldn't afford to have told. Patterson, looking defeated, cleared his throat. We need a moment to discuss this with my client. In private. Of course, Margaret replied, gathering her files with a serene smile. We'll be in the waiting area. You have 24 hours to respond to her offer. After that, I'll be returning Susan's call. The 24 hours felt like a lifetime. I spent most of it in my sterile apartment, pacing, unable to eat or sleep. I kept replaying the scene in the conference room, the look of sheer panic on Oliver's face. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction, a sense of vindication that was sharp and sweet. But another, smaller part of me felt a pang of something else, a hollow echo of the man I once thought I knew. I hadn't set out to destroy him. I had only set out to survive. But his survival and mine, it seemed, were mutually exclusive. The call came late that evening. It wasn't from Patterson or Margaret. It was Oliver, calling from his personal cell. Elena, we need to talk, he said. His voice was stripped of its usual arrogance. It was just tired. Just us. I don't think that's a good idea, Oliver, I said, my heart starting to pound. We should let the lawyers handle it. Please, he said, and the word was so devoid of its usual manipulation, so raw, that it stopped me. One conversation. No attorneys. No threats. No legal maneuvering. Just us. Like it used to be. Like it used to be. The phrase was a lie. Of course. It had never been just us. It had always been him. His ambition. And my supporting role. But something in his voice, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that mirrored my own, made me agree. We met at a small, dimly lit coffee shop in Andersonville, a neighborhood on the far north side. Neutral territory where neither of us held any memories. It was a place we would never have gone to when we were together. It wasn't trendy enough for him. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table in the back corner. He looked even worse than he had in the conference room. He changed out of his suit into a simple sweater, but it hung on him, as if he'd lost weight. The confident, brilliant lawyer who had so casually dismissed me in his office a few months ago was gone, replaced by a man who seemed to have aged years in a matter of weeks. He stood up when I approached, a gesture of politeness that felt jarringly out of place. Thank you for coming, he said. What do you want, Oliver? I asked, sitting down but not taking off my coat. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. I never wanted it to happen like this, he said, staring into his half-empty coffee cup. How did you want it to happen, Oliver? A quiet little note on the kitchen counter? A friendly email? Did you want me to pack my bags and thank you for the memories on my way out the door? I don't know, he admitted, his voice low, cleaner, I guess, more civilized. You mean you wanted me to disappear without making a sound? I stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a weary sadness. Elena, I know you hate me. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even fully understand. But we were friends once. Before all this, we cared about each other once. Can't we find a way to end this without completely destroying each other? I'm not trying to destroy you, Oliver, I said. And I was surprised to find that I meant it. I'm trying to survive this. And your definition of a civilized end involved me moving back into my childhood bedroom, with $25,000 to my name. My survival required a fight. The media attention, he said, shaking his head. The legal bills. The public humiliation. This isn't survival. This is revenge. I studied his face, looking for any trace of the man I'd once loved. The nerdy, ambitious law student who used to make me laugh with his terrible puns. I couldn't find him. He was gone. Do you regret it? I asked. The question that had been haunting me for months. Any of it? He was silent for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. I regret hurting you, he said finally. I regret the way it all happened. I regret that we couldn't find a way to end our marriage with some dignity before Vivian. But you don't regret her. I finished for him. He looked me straight in the eye. No, he said quietly. I don't regret her. At least he was honest. The honesty was a small, cold comfort. But it was something. It was real. It slammed the door shut on any lingering, foolish hope I might have harbored that this was all a terrible mistake he wished he could undo. Elena, what do you really want from this? He asked, his voice raw. What would it take? What would make you feel like justice has been served? I thought about it. What did I want? I wanted my life back. The one I had before I walked through that office door. But that was impossible. I wanted my marriage back. But that was now unthinkable. I wanted my sister back. But that was unforgivable. Those things were gone forever. So what was left? I want to know that there are consequences, I said slowly, the words forming as I spoke them. I want to know that you can't just discard people when they become inconvenient and not pay a price. I want to know that my life, the 2 years I gave to you, had value. There have been consequences, he said bitterly. My reputation is in tatters. My relationship with my mother is destroyed. My standing at the firm is hanging by a thread. Those aren't consequences I imposed, Oliver, I countered. Those are the natural results of your own choices. A consequence would be you actually paying a price for what you took from me, not just what you risk losing for yourself. Oliver was quiet for a long time, just stirring his cold coffee with a small spoon. The clinking sound was loud in the silence between us. Finally, he looked up, his expression one of utter defeat. What if I agreed to Margaret's terms? He asked. The full settlement. The alimony. Everything. I was stunned. Why would you do that? Because I'm tired. Elena, he said, his voice cracking. I'm so incredibly tired of fighting. I'm tired of the stress, the constant looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next shoe to drop. I'm tired of what this is turning me into. I want it to be over. A new thought occurred to me, a piece of the puzzle I hadn't considered. And Vivian? I asked. How does she feel about you giving me what amounts to half your net worth? Oliver's laugh was a short, bitter, ugly sound. Vivian thinks I should fight harder. She thinks you're bluffing about the media. She thinks you'll back down if we just apply enough pressure. Drag it out long enough for you to run out of money. And what do you think? He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw a glimmer of the old Oliver, the analytical, intelligent man I had married. I think, he said slowly, that I never really knew you at all. The Elena I married would never have done any of this. She would have taken the original settlement, cried for a few weeks, and then quietly disappeared. The Elena you married trusted you, I said softly. She believed in the promises you made. She thought her husband and her sister were fundamentally decent people. And now, he whispered. Now, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. She knows better. We sat in silence for a while longer. To strangers bound by a shared history of lies and betrayal. The evening crowd at the coffee shop bustled around us, their laughter and conversation a world away from the quiet devastation at our table. Finally, Oliver spoke, his voice resolute. I'll agree to the settlement. I'll have Patterson call Margaret in the morning. All of it? I asked, needing to hear it one last time. All of it? He confirmed. What about Vivian? I couldn't help but ask. What happens to you two now? Oliver's smile was grim, devoid of any humor. Elena, in the past month, I've learned something very interesting about your sister. What's that? She's very good at wanting things that belong to other people, he said, his eyes dark, She's much less enthusiastic about the costs of actually having them. Meaning she was thrilled with the idea of being with a successful, respected junior partner at a top law firm. She's far less excited about the reality of being with a broke, disgraced lawyer who's considered damaged goods in his own profession and can't afford the lifestyle she's accustomed to. I felt an unexpected, unwelcome stab of something that felt dangerously like sympathy for him, for the mess he had made of his own life. "I'm sorry," I said, and the words were true, though not in the way he might think. I was sorry for the waste, sorry for the wreckage, sorry for the people we had all become. "Don't be," he said, pushing his chair back and standing up. "I made my choices. Now I get to live with them." He turned and walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, disappearing into the cold Chicago night. I stayed there for a long time, watching the city lights blur through the window. The war was over. I had won. But I didn't feel victorious. I just felt quiet. The roaring fire of my rage had finally burned itself out, leaving behind only the cold, hard certainty of the ashes. The real work, the work of rebuilding, was about to begin. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later in a sterile legal office. A quiet, anticlimactic end to a brutal war. There was no grand courtroom showdown, just the scratching of pens on paper. Oliver kept the house, as I knew he would, but he had to take out a substantial second mortgage to pay me my share of its value. Combined with the cash settlement and the alimony arrangement Margaret had so brilliantly secured, I walked away with enough money to not just survive, but to start over. More importantly, I walked away with something I hadn't expected to find in the wreckage: a deep, unshakable sense of my own worth. The media attention that had so terrified Oliver turned out to be a blessing in disguise for me. The Channel 7 news segment never aired threat of it was a nub at the journalist who had been researching it, the one Margaret had accidentally mentioned. A sharp, empathetic woman named Sarah reached out to me after the settlement was finalized. She wasn't interested in a salacious story anymore. She was interested in me. "I hear stories like yours all the time," she told me over coffee. "Women who are financially and emotionally manipulated, left with nothing. But most of them don't fight back. You did. Why?" I told her about the moment of clarity, the decision to hire Margaret, the realization that my silence was a price of their comfort. I told her about the nonprofit I've been working with, and the stories of the women there. Our conversation sparked an idea. Sarah introduced me to the director of a city-wide legal aid foundation that helped women navigate high-conflict divorces. They were underfunded and their outreach materials were hopelessly outdated. They offered me a position as a communications coordinator, a part-time role where I could use my design skills to help other women tell their stories and find the resources they needed. My first project was creating a new website and a series of brochures for women who had been financially manipulated during divorce proceedings. The tagline I designed was simple: "Your story matters. Your voice counts. You deserve better." As I typed the words, I felt a profound sense of purpose. It felt like a mission statement not just for the foundation, but for my new life. I found my own place. A sun-drenched studio apartment in Wicker Park with exposed brick walls, huge industrial windows, and floors that creaked in a comforting, historic way. It was smaller than the Lincoln Park brownstone, but it was all mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every painting on the wall was chosen by me. For me, it was a space that felt like a true reflection of the person I was becoming, not the person I had been pretending to be. My design business, which I now ran from a sunlit corner of my studio, began to thrive. Freed from the shadow of Oliver's ambition, my own creativity flourished. My work was bolder, more authentic, and clients responded to it. Vivian tried to reach out several times in the months following the settlement. It started with a series of voicemails. The first one was clipped and angry, accusing me of ruining her life. The second was tearful and pleading, begging me to talk to people and fix the damage I'd done to her reputation. The last one was just a desperate, rambling message left late one night, full of self-pity and blame. Apparently, the high-end fashion industry had less tolerance for personal drama and ugly public divorces than she had anticipated. Reputation, as she once knew so well, was everything, and hers was destroyed. I never returned her calls. There was nothing left to say. My mother was a more complicated story. Our Cold War thawed into a fragile, uncertain spring. It started with awkward phone conversations where she'd talk about her garden, the weather, anything but the gaping wound in our family. She never mentioned Oliver or Vivian. Then, One day, she asked if she could visit my new apartment. She stood in the middle of my living room, looking around at the bright, airy space, at the evidence of my new, independent life. It's lovely, Elena, she said, her voice quiet. You seem to be doing well. I am, I said simply. We sat and had tea, the silence between us still present, but less heavy than before. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. I think I may have misjudged the situation, she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. It was the closest to an apology I knew I was ever going to get. Your father, she added, her voice thick with emotion. He always said you were the strong one. I always thought he meant emotionally strong. You know, nurturing. The quiet kind of strength. I didn't realize he meant steel spine strong. I didn't realize it either, I said. Until I had to be. 6 months after the settlement, I was having dinner with Margaret. We become unlikely friends, bonded by the foxhole of my divorce. Have you seen the news? She asked, scrolling through her phone as we waited for our food. What news? She turned the phone around. It was an article from a major Chicago business journal. The headline read, Sterling and Finch partners suspended amid ethics investigation. The article detailed an internal probe at the firm, sparked by concerns over a partner's conduct during a contentious recent divorce, which had led to the discovery of a pattern of improper handling of client funds and multiple conflicts of interest. Oliver's photo was next to the headline. He looked gaunt and haunted. What does this mean? I asked, my stomach twisting. It means your ex-husband's problems have expanded far beyond his personal life, Margaret said, taking a sip of her wine. Apparently, the scrutiny that started with our case led the senior partners to take a much closer look at his professional conduct. They didn't like what they found. Is this because of what we did? Not directly, she said carefully. We never accused him of professional misconduct. But sometimes, when you shine a bright light into one dark corner, you find that the rock goes deeper than you expected. You just gave them a reason to turn on the light. I watched the news reports about it later that week with mixed feelings. I hadn't wanted Oliver to be completely destroyed, just held accountable. But actions have consequences, a chain reaction that you can't always control once it starts. His choices had set this in motion. Not mine. The real headline, the one that would change the course of my new life, came 3 days later. Not on television or in a newspaper, but in my email inbox. It was from a producer at a major television network in New York. The same producer, Cynthia, who I would end up meeting in that glass-walled room a year later. The email was brief and to the point. They were producing a new documentary series about women who had fought back against profound betrayal and manipulation. We're calling it Reckoning. The email read, we want to tell stories about women who refuse to be victims, who turn their pain into power and their betrayal into a catalyst for justice. Your case has become something of a legend in legal circles here. They call you the woman who wouldn't disappear quietly. I stared at the email for a long time, the cursor blinking on the screen. A year ago, the very idea of my intensely private, painful life becoming public entertainment would have been mortifying. I would have deleted the email and tried to forget I ever saw it. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I saw it now not as an intrusion, but as an opportunity, a chance to control my own narrative on a national stage. A chance to help other women understand that they didn't have to accept betrayal silently, that their stories mattered. I took a deep breath and began to type my reply. I'm interested, I wrote, but I have conditions. I want editorial control over how my story is told, and I want a portion of any proceeds to be donated to a foundation that provides legal aid to women in similar situations. The documentary aired 8 months later. The episode about my case was a season premiere. It was titled, with a flair for the dramatic that made me cringe and smile at the same time. I walked into my husband's office and found my sister on his lap. What I did next made headlines. It was the highest-rated episode of the entire series. I live in my Wicker Park studio, which now doubles as a headquarters for my thriving one-woman design firm. My business has grown beyond anything I'd ever imagined, fueled in part by referrals from women across the country who had seen the documentary and wanted to work with someone who understood the power of controlling your own narrative. I'm dating someone new. His name is Alex. He's an architect I met through a client. A kind, funny, grounded man who thinks my story is inspiring rather than scandalous. He admires my strength rather than being intimidated by it. We're taking things slowly, building something based on honesty and mutual respect. not convenience and assumption. It feels quiet and real. Oliver moved to another state after his law license was suspended for 2 years. I heard through the grap of Annette, same one that had once tormented meth at. He's working for a small firm doing real estate closings. A universe away from the corner office and senior partnership he'd once coveted. He and Vivian broke up about 7 months after the settlement. Apparently. They're great. Epic love couldn't survive the transition from a forbidden, high-stakes romance to the mundane reality of financial stress and public disgrace. The thrill of the chase was gone, and they found they had nothing left in common. Vivian tried to rebuild her PR career, but found that reputation follows you, especially in a small, gossipy industry like fashion. The last I heard, she was working for a large corporate communications firm in a different city. A respectable but unremarkable job that pays the bills but does nothing to feed her insatiable ego. We have not spoken a word to each other since the day she stormed out of my house. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever see her again. And I find that I don't care. My mother and I have managed to rebuild our relationship, but it's built on new ground, on a foundation of honesty we never had before. She comes to my apartment for dinner most Sundays. We talk about books and politics, and my work with the foundation. She never mentions Oliver or Vivian unless I bring them up first, which I rarely do. It's an unspoken truce, a recognition of a wound that may never fully heal but has, at least, scarred over. She sees me differently now, not as her fragile, less successful daughter, but as a woman of substance, in a strange, painful way. My divorce gave me the one thing I'd always craved from her respect. I don't hate them anymore. Not Oliver. Not Vivian. Not even my mother for her casual cruelty. I don't even hate the woman I used to be. The one who spent years making herself smaller to avoid conflict. Hate is exhausting. And I have better things to do with my energy. It's a heavy suitcase. And I finally learned to put it down. But I haven't forgiven them, either. Forgiveness implies that what they did was, on some level, forgivable. And I don't believe it was. You don't forgive an arsonist for burning down your house, just because they seem sorry about it afterward when they're standing in the cold. You don't forgive a betrayal that was so calculated, so complete, just because the betrayers have moved on and are suffering their own consequences. Forgiveness feels like a favor to them, a letting go that they haven't earned. Instead, I've done something more powerful. I've moved beyond them. They have become footnotes in my story, not the main characters. They are part of my past, but they are not part of my future. Their power over me was rooted in my love for them, and my belief in their love for me. Once that was gone, they had nothing left to hold over me. They became, simply, irrelevant. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm working on a new design project or reading in my quiet living room, the city lights of Chicago twinkling outside my window, I think about that afternoon. I think about walking into Oliver's office and watching my world end. I think about the woman I was entrusting, accommodating, naive, a woman so willing to please, so desperate for harmony, that she couldn't see the discord right in front of her. That woman is gone. She wasn't destroyed in the fire. She was forged by it. In her place is someone harder. Yes, but also wiser. Someone stronger. Someone infinitely more dangerous to people who mistake kindness for weakness. Cynthia, the documentary producer, was right about one thing. I had become something of a legend in certain circles. Not as a victim who had been wronged, but as a woman who had refused to accept that being wronged was the end of her story. She had refused to be a tragedy. My phone rings sometimes with calls from women in similar situations. They get my number through the foundation, or hear about my case through friends of friends. They always start the same way. Their voice is hesitant and full of a pain I know all too well. I don't know what to do. They say, I feel so powerless. And I always tell them the same thing. You're not powerless. You just haven't figured out how to use your power yet. Because that's the ultimate truth I learned in those brutal months of legal battles and media attention and family drama. Everyone has power. The quiet wife, the overlooked sister, the woman everyone assumes will just go away. The question is never whether you have it. It's whether you're willing to use it. For most of my life, I wasn't. Then, I was. And it made all the difference. The headlines that followed weren't just about my divorce case. They were about a choice. The choice to fight back. To demand better. To refuse to be silenced. To refuse to disappear quietly into someone else's narrative of your life. It's a choice every woman faces at some point. In some form. And when they ask me about it now, When the women I work with at the foundation want to know how I found the courage to fight, when everything seems stacked against me, I tell them the truth. I didn't find courage. I say, looking back at the memory of that woman sitting in the dark with an empty wine bottle and a head full of rage, I found clarity. And once you see the truth clearly, everything else becomes possible. I still see my reflection in the windows of my studio, but the woman looking back is no longer a ghost. She's solid. She's real. She has a spine made of steel, just like my father always knew. My story could have been a tragedy about a woman who lost everything, but I didn't let them write the ending. I picked up the pen and wrote it myself. And in my version, it's not a tragedy. It's a reckoning. And it's the story of how I finally, after 32 years, came home to myself. The work continues. For me and for the women I help. Every website I design for a woman starting her own business after a devastating divorce. Every logo I create for a nonprofit. Every story I help amplify, it's all part of the same work. The work of taking back the narrative. Alex and I are talking about moving in together. We found a beautiful old graystone duplex in Logan Square with a small yard. He wants to plant a garden. He asked me what kind of flowers I liked. I told him I liked flowers that were resilient. The kind that could survive a long, hard Chicago winter and still have the strength to bloom again in the spring. He smiled. And I knew he understood. My life is quiet now. Most days, it's filled with the pleasant hum of work I love, the warmth of a man who respects me, and the comforting solitude of a home that is truly my own. The drama is over. The war is won. But every now and then, I get an email or a call, and I'm reminded of the fire. I'm reminded of the woman I was, and the woman I became. And I am grateful, not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it brought. Not for the pain, but for the strength it forged. I wouldn't wish my story on anyone, but I wouldn't trade the ending for anything in the world.